The small bell above the door chimed as Marie Chen pushed open the heavy glass door of Taylor's Firearms and Supply. The familiar scent of gun oil and leather welcomed her, a smell that always brought back memories of her time in the Marine Corps. At 45, she carried herself with the kind of quiet confidence that came from years of service, though most people would never guess her background just by looking at her. The late afternoon sun streamed through the store's dusty windows, casting long shadows across the polished glass display cases. Marie adjusted her light denim jacket, more out of habit than necessity. The store was peaceful at this hour, with only a couple of regular customers browsing the hunting gear section and old Mr. Thompson carefully examining a scope at the counter. "Afternoon, Marie," called out Tom, the store owner, from behind the register. His weathered face broke into a genuine smile as he recognized one of his most knowledgeable customers. He was organizing a new shipment of ammunition, his reading glasses perched precariously on the tip of his nose. "Hey, Tom," Marie replied warmly, making her way toward the ammunition display. "Got any of that practice ammo in stock? The one we talked about last week?" Her boots made soft sounds against the worn wooden floor as she moved with the kind of awareness that never really leaves a combat veteran. As she waited for Tom's response, Marie found herself studying the new additions to his wall of fame. Photos of local hunting successes and shooting competition winners. She smiled at a picture of Tom's granddaughter with her first hunting rifle, remembering her own first shooting lesson from her father decades ago. The fluorescent lights hummed quietly overhead as Marie checked her list. She needed more target practice ammunition for the weekend. Teaching at the local women's self-defense class had become her way of giving back to the community, and she always made sure to maintain her skills. Her students never failed to be amazed when she demonstrated proper shooting stance and technique, often joking that she moved like someone straight out of an action movie. A young couple near the fishing gear section whispered and pointed at a high-end hunting rifle, probably planning for the upcoming season. Marie remembered being just as excited about her first firearm purchase. The store had that effect on people. It wasn't just about the weapons, but the stories and experiences that came with them. She paused at the handgun display, not because she needed one. Her current sidearm was perfectly fine, but because Tom had mentioned getting some new models in. The glass case reflected her image: average height, athletic build, and shoulder-length dark hair streaked with a few strands of gray she'd earned the hard way. Nothing about her appearance screamed veteran or federal marshal, and that's exactly how she preferred it. The wall clock ticked steadily toward 4 in the afternoon, and the store had settled into that peaceful lull between the lunch rush and evening traffic. Marie could hear Tom in the back, probably digging through boxes for her ammunition. The calm atmosphere was about to change, though nobody in the store could have predicted just how dramatically. She was examining a new cleaning kit when the bell above the door chimed again. This time, the sound seemed to carry a different weight, and the comfortable silence of the store shifted ever so slightly. Marie didn't turn around immediately, but she noticed how Mr. Thompson's shoulders stiffened, and how Tom's footsteps in the back room paused for just a moment too long. Years of training had taught Marie to trust her instincts, and right now, those instincts were telling her that something wasn't quite right. She continued to study the cleaning kit, maintaining her casual posture while using the reflection in the glass case to observe the new arrivals. The peaceful afternoon at Taylor's Firearms and Supply was about to become anything but ordinary. The heavy thud of motorcycle boots against wooden floorboards broke the peaceful quiet of the store. 3 men walked in wearing leather vests covered in patches, their faces weathered from long hours on the road. The tallest one, with a thick gray beard and arms covered in faded tattoos, led the group. His vest had "Road Captain" stitched across the back in bold letters that had seen better days. Tom emerged from the back room, ammunition box in hand, and Marie could see how his friendly shopkeeper's smile became a bit more forced. She'd been around long enough to read people, and Tom's body language told her these weren't his favorite customers. The older couple browsing fishing gear quietly moved toward the far corner of the store, while Mr. Thompson suddenly became very interested in a rack of hunting magazines. "Nice place you got here," the bearded man said, his voice carrying that false friendliness that usually meant trouble. His two companions spread out, one moving toward the counter while the other lingered near the door. They moved with purpose, like they'd done this dance before. Marie kept her attention on the cleaning kit display, but her senses were fully alert now. She could hear everything. The scrape of boots on the floor, the rustle of leather, even the slight creak of the ceiling fan spinning lazily above. Through the reflection in the glass, she watched as the leader's eyes scanned the store, pausing briefly on the security cameras before settling on her. "Well, look what we have here, boys," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Didn't expect to find such a pretty face in a place like this." His buddies chuckled on cue, like background actors in a bad movie. Marie could smell leather and cigarette smoke as they moved closer. Tom cleared his throat. "Can I help you gentlemen find anything specific today?" His hand stayed close to the counter, and Marie knew exactly what was mounted underneath it. She'd helped him install the silent alarm system herself last summer. "Oh, we're just browsing," said the one by the door, but his eyes were fixed more on the cash register than any merchandise. His jacket was zipped up despite the warm weather, never a good sign in a store like this. The leader moved closer to Marie, trying to use his height to intimidate. "You know anything about guns, sweetheart? Pretty little thing like you might need some expert advice." His attempt at a charming smile didn't reach his eyes, which were busy calculating something Marie had seen too many times before. The third man, younger than the others with a fresh snake tattoo crawling up his neck, snickered as he pretended to examine a rack of holsters. "Yeah, boss, maybe we should show her how to handle a proper piece." The hidden meaning in his words made Mr. Thompson's knuckles go white around his magazine. Marie continued her practiced movements, checking price tags with careful precision, giving no indication that she'd spent years handling weapons in combat zones. She could feel him trying to box her in, using a technique she'd seen countless times, one that usually worked on people who didn't know better. The air in the store grew thick with tension. Tom's fingers drummed quietly on the counter, a nervous habit she'd noticed over years of friendship. The older couple had made their way to the front of the store, but the biker by the door shifted slightly, blocking their path without making it obvious. Some people might have felt fear in this situation, but Mary felt something entirely different. It was like stepping back in time to her training days, when every scenario had a solution if you just kept your head clear. These men had no idea they'd walked into precisely the wrong store, on precisely the wrong day, choosing precisely the wrong person to harass. The leader moved even closer, his reflection now dominating the glass case in front of Marie. "Come on, darling, why don't you turn around so we can have a proper conversation about firearms?" His tone carried that edge of menace that had probably worked for him many times before. But this time, things were about to go very differently than he expected. Marie took her time turning around, a move that seemed casual but was anything but. She'd learned long ago that control of a situation often came down to controlling its pace. The bearded leader stood too close, trying to crowd her personal space. Behind him, his two friends had positioned themselves in what they probably thought was a subtle pattern, but to her trained eye might as well have been a textbook diagram. "I appreciate the offer," she said, her voice steady and calm, "but I'm doing just fine on my own." She held his gaze with the kind of confidence that often caught bullies off guard. The leader's smile faltered for just a second. People like him weren't used to such direct eye contact from their targets. "Now, don't be like that," he said, reaching out to touch her shoulder. "We're just trying to be friendly." The snake-tattooed man by the holster shifted his weight, hand disappearing under his vest. Tom's fingers stopped drumming on the counter, and the store went deadly quiet. Marie glanced at the hand approaching her shoulder, as if it were nothing more interesting than a fly. "You know," she said, keeping her voice conversational, "I actually teach firearm safety courses, She took a small step to the side, a move that seemed random but actually gave her better positioning. The first rule is always about proper handling. The leader's face darkened. He wasn't used to people stepping away from him, much less women giving him lectures. "Is that right?" he growled, all pretense of friendliness gone. "And what else do you teach?" His hand changed course, now reaching for her arm with clear intent. That's when things got interesting. Before his fingers could make contact, Marie shifted her weight ever so slightly. "Well," she continued, as if they were having a normal conversation, "one important lesson is about situational awareness." Her movement was so smooth it almost looked like a dance step. Suddenly, she wasn't where his hand expected her to be. The leader's grab caught nothing but air, throwing him slightly off balance. His face registered confusion, then anger. People didn't just step away from him like that. Behind him, Snake Tattoo took a more aggressive stance, while Doorman started moving forward. "Another good lesson," Marie went on, her voice still calm as she maintained perfect positioning, "is about reading body language." She gestured casually towards Snake Tattoo. "For example, when someone keeps reaching under their vest, like your friend there, they're usually not just checking for their wallet." That stopped them all for a moment. The leader's eyes narrowed, reassessing the situation. Tom had both hands on the counter now, and Mr. Thompson had put down his magazine, his own hand suspiciously close to his jacket pocket. The older couple by the door had pressed themselves against a display of fishing rods, trying to become invisible. "You've got quite a mouth on you," the leader snarled, trying to regain control of the situation. He stepped forward again, this time with clear aggression. "Maybe somebody needs to teach you some respect." Marie's smile never wavered, but something changed in her eyes. A look that combat veterans would recognize instantly. "Respect is earned," she said quietly. "Just like those patches on your vest are supposed to be." Her comment about their patches hit a nerve. These weren't the kind of men who earned things honestly. The leader's face turned red with rage. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. Women in gun stores were supposed to be easy targets, not standing their ground, and certainly not commenting on their patches. He made his move, faster this time, reaching for her with both hands. And that's when Marie showed them exactly why assumptions about women in gun stores could be very, very dangerous. The peaceful afternoon at Taylor's Firearms and Supply was about to become a lesson none of them would ever forget. Time seemed to slow down as the leader lunged forward. His mistake wasn't just in underestimating Marie. It was in thinking he had the upper hand at all. The moment his hands reached for her, years of military training kicked in automatically, like muscle memory from a familiar dance. Marie stepped into his movement rather than away from it, a technique that caught him completely off guard. One moment, he was reaching for her, and the next his momentum was working against him. His eyes widened in surprise as he suddenly found himself off balance. His right arm held in a firm but controlled grip that somehow left him unable to pull away. "First lesson in self-defense," Marie said calmly, as if she were actually teaching a class, "is using your opponent's energy against them." The leader tried to twist free, but each movement only made his position more awkward. His face turned red, a mix of embarrassment and growing anger. The snake-tattooed man's hand finally emerged from his vest, but Tom's voice cut through the tension like a knife. "I wouldn't do that if I were you, son." The solid sound of a shotgun being readied underneath the counter left little room for misunderstanding. Mr. Thompson had also straightened up, his jacket now open to reveal a concealed carry holster. "You don't know who you're messing with," the doorman growled, taking a step forward. His hand was reaching behind his back, but he froze when Marie spoke again. "Actually," she said, maintaining her hold on their leader while reaching into her jacket with her free hand, "I think you're the ones who don't know who you're messing with." The badge she pulled out caught the store's fluorescent lighting, gleaming gold and official. "Federal Marshal," she added, almost apologetically. The atmosphere in the store shifted instantly. The doorman's hand moved away from his back like he'd been burned. Snake Tattoo's face went pale, probably thinking about the illegal weapon he'd been about to draw. The leader stopped struggling, though his face showed he was having trouble processing how things had gone so wrong so quickly. Now, Marie continued, her voice professional but firm, I'm going to guess that none of you have permits for those concealed weapons you're carrying. And judging by your friend's reaction at the counter, I'd bet good money they're not exactly legally obtained either. Tom had come around the counter now, his shotgun held low but ready. The older couple had managed to edge closer to the door, but nobody was leaving. Tom's silent alarm had done its job, and the distinct sound of approaching sirens was growing louder. Here's what's going to happen, Marie said, adjusting her hold slightly as the leader made one last half-hearted attempt to break free. The local police are about to join our little gathering. When they do, everybody's going to stay very calm and cooperative. Because right now, you're just looking at weapons charges. Any sudden moves, and things will get a lot more complicated. The doorman looked at his leader, then at the approaching police lights now visible through the store's windows. Snake Tattoo was sweating, his tough guy act completely gone. The leader himself had finally stopped struggling, though his face showed he was already thinking about how he explained this to his gang. Afternoon, officers, Marie called out as 2 police cars pulled up outside. She could see the local officers she knew well through the glass, drawing their weapons with practiced precision. We've got an interesting situation here that could use your help sorting out. What had started as an attempt to intimidate a woman in a gun store had turned into something these 3 would remember for a very long time. And as the police entered, Marie allowed herself a small smile, thinking about how this would make an excellent teaching example for her next self-defense class. The local police worked with practiced efficiency as they entered Taylor's Firearms and Supply. Officer Chen, a veteran of the force whom Marie had known for years, took charge of the scene. The 3 bikers were quickly separated and secured, their tough guy attitudes melting away under the professional handling of law enforcement. Good to see you, Marie, Officer Chen said as his partners began reading rights and checking for weapons. Somehow I'm not surprised you're in the middle of this. He pulled out his notepad, ready to take her statement, but his eyes showed he was fighting back a smile. Just doing some shopping, Marie replied with a slight shrug. These gentlemen seemed to have some interesting ideas about customer service. The leader shot her a dark look from where he was being searched, but stayed quiet. His friends were already spilling their guts to the other officers, each trying to minimize their own involvement. The search turned up exactly what Marie had suspected: 3 illegal handguns with filed-off serial numbers. More interesting were the notes found in the doorman's pocket, a crude map of the store's layout with times and security details. What had started as harassment was revealing itself to be something much more planned. Tom walked over, his shotgun now safely stored behind the counter. They've been casing the place for weeks, he said, shaking his head. Coming in at different times, asking odd questions about when we make deposits. Never thought they'd try something in broad daylight, though. The older couple was giving their witness statement to another officer, describing how they'd noticed the bikers blocking the exit. Mr. Thompson added his own observations about their suspicious behavior, his years of hunting having taught him to notice small details that most people would miss. Found something interesting in their records, Officer Chen said, looking up from his radio. These 3 matched the description of suspects in a string of armed robberies across 3 counties. Small shops, usually family-owned businesses. They've been getting bolder with each hit. Marie nodded, remembering a briefing about similar incidents she'd received at the marshal's office last week. Guess they'd picked the wrong store this time, she said. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. A group of armed robbers walking into a store full of law enforcement, both active and retired. One of the younger officers was checking the bikers' vests, his eyes widening as he recognized some of the patches. These are from the Road Reapers, he said. We've been trying to build a case against their club for months. Their leader's going to want to hear about this." "Oh, I'm sure he will," Marie replied, watching as the suspects were led to waiting patrol cars. "And I'm equally sure he'll be interested in how quickly his people started talking once they were caught." She knew from experience that loyalty among criminals often lasted only as long as their freedom. Tom's regular customers had started gathering near the windows, drawn by the police presence. Inside, the store felt different now, like a spell had been broken. The tension that had built up during the confrontation was replaced by a sense of relief and even a touch of pride. This little gun store had just helped take some dangerous criminals off the streets. "You know," Tom said as he watched a last police car pull away, "I think I might need to update that security system you helped me install. Maybe add a few more cameras." He paused, then added with a grin, "Though having a federal marshal as a regular customer seems to work pretty well too." Marie finally allowed herself to relax slightly. The afternoon's excitement was winding down, but she knew there would be paperwork waiting for her at the office. Still, as she looked around at the now peaceful store, she couldn't help but feel satisfied. Sometimes the best lessons in life came from unexpected teachers, even if those teachers were three overconfident bikers who learned the hard way not to judge a book by its cover. Inside Taylor's Firearms and Supply, the atmosphere had shifted from tense confrontation to focused investigation. Detective Miller arrived on the scene, his weathered face lighting up with recognition when he saw Marie. They'd worked together on several cases before, and he knew her reputation well. "Quite a day for shopping," he said, pulling out a worn leather notebook. The store had become a proper crime scene now, with officers taking photographs and collecting evidence. The detective's eyes swept over the place where the confrontation had occurred. "Mind walking me through what happened?" As Marie recounted the events, more pieces of the puzzle started falling into place. The young officer who'd been checking their vests approached with an evidence bag containing several cell phones. "Detective, you might want to see this," he said, holding up one of the phones. "Text messages about other stores in the area. Looks like they had a whole list of targets." The detective nodded grimly. Local shops, all with older owners, all known to keep cash on hand. He turned to Tom. "Your store would have been their biggest score yet. They've been working their way up, getting bolder each time." Tom shook his head, looking at the security cameras he'd installed. "Never thought those camera upgrades Marie suggested would pay off like this. Got everything on video, clear as day." He gestured to the computer behind the counter where the footage was already being downloaded for evidence. One of the forensics team members called out from near the door. She'd found fresh scratch marks on the lock, evidence that someone had been tampering with it recently, probably casing the place after hours. The pieces were coming together to show just how planned this attempted robbery had been. "Found something interesting in their truck," Officer Chen said, returning from the parking lot. "Duffel bags, zip ties, and some heavy-duty tools. They weren't just planning to hit the register." He handed over some photos showing the contents of the vehicle. "Looks like they were aiming to clean out the whole inventory." Marie studied the photos, her trained eye picking up details others might miss. "Those bags are military surplus," she noted. "Same type used in other robberies across state lines. This might be bigger than your local cases, Detective." The older couple who'd witnessed everything was still there, providing additional details to another officer. The wife mentioned how she'd seen the same men hanging around other shops in town, always watching, always making notes. Her husband added that he'd spotted their bikes outside the bank just last week. "Good thing you were here," Detective Miller said to Marie, closing his notebook. "This could have gone very differently." He glanced at the elderly couple, then at Tom. These guys usually didn't leave witnesses behind in their other jobs. Tom busied himself straightening a display that had been knocked askew during the confrontation. "You know what gets me?" he said. "How they just assumed Marie would be an easy target. 20 years owning this store, and I've learned never to underestimate anyone who walks through that door." The detective's radio crackled with updates from the station. The suspect's fingerprints had matched those found at other crime scenes. Federal databases were lighting up with connections to similar cases across 3 states. What had started as an attempted robbery was unraveling into something much larger. "You'll need to come down to the station," Detective Miller told Marie. "Feds are going to want to coordinate on this one. Looks like these guys might be the break we needed to crack open a whole network of organized crime." Marie nodded, knowing her quiet afternoon of shopping had turned into what would likely be weeks of investigation and paperwork. But looking around at Tom's store, at the elderly couple who were safe, at the evidence of crimes that would now be solved, she couldn't help but feel it was worth it. The sun was starting to set outside, casting long shadows through the store windows. Another officer entered with coffee for everyone. It was going to be a long evening of statements and evidence processing. But that's how justice worked sometimes, built on the foundation of being in the right place at the right time, with the right person who refused to be intimidated. The police station buzzed with activity as officers processed the 3 suspects from the gun store incident. The investigation room had turned into a command center, with photos and maps covering the walls, showing connections to other robberies across the state. Marie sat at a desk, reviewing security footage from Taylor's Firearms and Supply while helping piece together the bigger picture. "The store's cameras caught everything perfectly," said Detective Miller, pointing to clear images of the suspects casing the store over the past few weeks. "Your security system upgrade suggestions really paid off, especially those hidden cameras near the door." The interrogation rooms down the hall were busy. The youngest of the 3 suspects, the one with the snake tattoo, had started talking first. His confession opened up leads to dozens of other crimes, painting a picture of an organized crime network that stretched far beyond their small town. "They've hit at least 12 other stores," Officer Chen reported, dropping a thick file on the desk. "Always the same pattern, targeting small businesses, older owners, places they thought would be easy marks." He shook his head, looking at the growing evidence wall. "But they got sloppy this time. Got too confident." The radio crackled with updates from field teams. Based on information from the suspects, police were already raiding storage units across 3 counties, discovering stolen merchandise from previous robberies. The evidence was mounting by the hour. "Found something interesting in their phone records," a tech analyst called out from her computer. "Regular calls to some pretty well-known names in the underground. These guys were just the muscle. Looks like they were working for someone much bigger." Marie watched as more pieces fell into place. What had started as a confrontation in a small-town gun store was unraveling a criminal enterprise that had terrorized local businesses for months. The wall of evidence now included photos of other victims, shop owners who'd lost everything, families whose lives had been turned upside down. The door opened, and Tom walked in, carrying a fresh stack of papers. "Found these old receipts," he said, handing them over. "Those guys had been in my store 5 times in the last month, always asking strange questions about my delivery schedule." His face showed a mix of anger and relief. Anger at being targeted, relief that it had ended before anyone got hurt. The elderly couple from the store had gone home hours ago, but their detailed statement had proven invaluable. They'd recognized the suspects from other shops in town, filling in gaps in the timeline that investigators had been struggling to complete. "Federal task force is on their way," Detective Miller announced, hanging up his phone. "They're particularly interested in those military surplus bags. Turns out they're connected to a string of robberies up and down the coast." Marie nodded, remembering similar cases from her federal marshal briefings. "These guys were just the tip of the iceberg," she said, studying the growing web of connections on the evidence board. "They were testing locations, gathering intel for bigger scores." The station's coffee maker worked overtime as evening turned to night. Officers came and went, bringing in more evidence, more connections, more pieces of the puzzle. The 3 suspects sat in separate cells, probably realizing for the first time just how much trouble they were in. "You know what gets me?" Tom said, looking at the security footage playing on a nearby screen. "They walked into my store thinking they had it all figured out. Never occurred to them that the woman they tried to intimidate would be their downfall." The night shift was coming on duty as Marie finished her report. Tomorrow would bring federal agents, more questioning, and the start of what promised to be a lengthy prosecution. But for now, she could take satisfaction in knowing that a simple trip to buy ammunition had turned into something much more significant. A chance to help break up a criminal operation that had been terrorizing small business owners for far too long. The morning sun cast long shadows through the courthouse windows as the three bikers faced the judge. 2 weeks had passed since the incident at Taylor's Firearms and Supply, and the case had grown far beyond what anyone initially expected. The courtroom was packed with local business owners, all eager to see justice served. "We're looking at multiple federal charges," the prosecutor explained to the assembled crowd during a break. "Armed robbery, weapons trafficking, conspiracy, and that's just the beginning." She shuffled through her papers, each page representing another crime that had come to light during the investigation. Tom sat in the front row, watching the proceedings with keen interest. His store had become something of a local legend, with customers now pointing out the exact spot where Marie had turned the tables on the would-be robbers. He even framed a newspaper article about the incident, hanging it proudly behind the counter. "The evidence is overwhelming," one federal agent whispered to Marie during testimony. "Those security cameras you recommended caught everything. Plus, their phones gave us an entire network of contacts. We're talking about operations in 5 different states." The elderly couple who witnessed everything sat quietly in the courthouse, holding hands. They'd become minor celebrities in their small town, telling and retelling the story of how they watched a simple shopping trip turn into a takedown of a major criminal operation. Outside the courthouse, local news vans gathered. The story had caught national attention, not just because of the dramatic arrest, but because it had led to the discovery of a massive crime ring. Small business owners from across the region had come forward with similar stories, finally feeling safe enough to speak out. "You should have seen their faces," Officer Chen said during a break in testimony, when they realized who they'd tried to intimidate. Classic case of judging a book by its cover. He shook his head, smiling at the memory. The body camera footage from the arrests had become required viewing at the police academy. Back at the station, the evidence room had needed extra space. Recovered stolen goods filled several storage areas. Everything from firearms to electronics, all taken from small businesses over the past year. The task force had been working around the clock, connecting items to their rightful owners. "It's like watching dominoes fall," Detective Miller commented, reviewing new case files. Every day brought fresh leads, more arrests in other cities. The three bikers' phones had provided a goldmine of information, leading to raids on storage facilities and safe houses across state lines. Marie watched as more witnesses took the stand. Store owners described months of intimidation, subtle threats, and losses that had nearly ruined their businesses. Each testimony added another piece to the puzzle, showing just how extensive the criminal operation had been. The youngest of the three defendants couldn't stop fidgeting in his chair. His snake tattoo, once meant to look threatening, now seemed to mock him as he faced the consequences of his actions. His lawyer looked increasingly frustrated as more evidence piled up against his client. "You've done more than just catch some thieves," the federal agent told Marie during another recess. "This case is helping us dismantle several organized crime networks. Those guys picked the wrong person to mess with and the wrong store to rob." Local business owners started organizing a community watch program, inspired by how the incident had brought their town together. Tom had been teaching them about security measures, sharing what he'd learned about protecting their shops and staying alert. The prosecutor stood for her closing arguments, her voice firm and confident. The evidence was clear, the case strong. What had started as an attempted robbery in a small-town gun store had exploded into one of the biggest criminal cases the county had seen in years. As the sun began to set outside the courthouse, casting an orange glow through the windows, there was a sense that justice was finally being served. Not just for Tom's store, but for all the small business owners who'd lived in fear, all the communities that had been targeted, all the people who'd felt helpless against organized crime. 3 months after the incident at Taylor's Firearms and Supply, the small town had changed in subtle but significant ways. The morning sun streamed through the newly cleaned windows of Tom's shop as he unlocked the door for another day of business. The bell chimed just like it had on that fateful afternoon, but now it carried a different meaning, a reminder of how one moment could change everything. "Morning, Tom," called out Marie as she walked in, right on schedule for her weekly visit. The store had become even more of a community hub than before. Today, a group of local business owners had gathered for their regular security meeting, sharing tips and watching out for each other. "You should see what they're saying in the papers," Tom said, holding up the latest article. The final sentencing had come down yesterday. All 3 bikers were facing significant prison time, and their cooperation had led to dozens more arrests across the region. The headline read, "Small Town Takedown Leads to Major Crime Ring Bust." The elderly couple who'd witnessed everything that day were there too, having become regular fixtures at the store. The wife was teaching a women's self-defense class in the community center now, inspired by what she'd seen. Her husband helped Tom organize neighborhood watch meetings, their experience having shown them the importance of community vigilance. The federal task force called again. Marie mentioned, checking out the new security features Tom had installed. They've recovered almost $2 million in stolen goods so far. Every day, they're finding more connections, more evidence. She smiled at a photo on the wall. A group shot of all the local shop owners whose cases had finally been solved. The store itself had evolved. What used to be just a gun shop had transformed into something of a community safety center. Tom had set up a small classroom area in the back, where he and Marie took turns teaching safety courses. The walls were lined with photos and newspaper clippings, telling the story of how one attempted robbery had sparked a movement of community protection. "You know what's funny?" Tom said, adjusting a display case. "Those guys thought they were targeting the weakest store in town. Instead, they walked into exactly the wrong place at exactly the right time." He glanced at the security cameras. There were more of them now, all carefully placed based on what they'd learned. Outside, the street was coming to life with morning traffic. New shops had opened up recently, their owners feeling safer with the increased community awareness and support. The old fear that had gripped small business owners had been replaced by a sense of empowerment and unity. Marie watched as a young woman entered the store, looking nervous but determined. She was the 4th new customer this week coming in for safety training. Word had spread about how knowledge and preparation could make all the difference. "Sometimes I think about that day," the elderly wife said, arranging pamphlets about personal safety. "How different things could have been if you hadn't been here, Marie. But then I realize it's not just about you being here. It's about what we all learned from it." The morning sun climbed higher, and more people filtered into the store. Some came for supplies, others for advice, and many just to be part of the community that had grown stronger through adversity. The incident that could have been a tragedy had instead become a turning point. "You know what the best part is?" Tom said, watching his store fill with familiar faces. "Everyone who walks through that door now knows that you can't judge people by how they look. That little lesson probably saved more than just my store." As Marie helped a new customer pick out safety equipment, she caught her reflection in the glass case. Just an ordinary person who had turned an ordinary day into something extraordinary. The store's bell chimed again as more people entered, each ring a reminder that sometimes the best defense against darkness was a community standing together in the light.